how many of you have heard of ordinals? Raise your hand. There we go. Okay, so ordinals have created massive controversy in the Bitcoin community, and kind of we're examining what transactions are considered spam, right? So they've also created this different type of incentive structure for transactions to bypass the peer-to-peer network, and miners just incorporate them without being broadcast to the network. So Jameson is going to explore the risks of too many transactions bypassing the network and its implications on the miner and network transparency. So let's raise our hands for Jameson.
All right. Right, so what I'm about to talk about is probably one of the most frustrating research projects that I've undertaken in a long time, and it's something that I've been interested in for a while, but as we'll get into, it's a difficult problem to try to quantify. And in particular, the high-level gist of this is, are the miners working as expected? You know, are they following the rules of the network, or are they trying to do sneaky things to bypass the normal operation of the network, you know, while still remaining, you know, valid within the consensus rules? So, you know, the Bitcoin network and really all crypto networks are extremely complicated beasts. You know, they are decentralized, permissionless networks, so that anyone who wants to can join them as long as they're following the protocol. And we'll start off here just, I'll do a high-level discussion of how transactions work. And while I'm specifically talking about Bitcoin, and that's what my data is focused on, at a very high level, all of this stuff applies to pretty much every major layer one, you know, blockchain network out there. So to start off, we'll just talk about the gossip model. And what is this? Basically, this is how data gets propagated around these networks. So this holds true for both transactions and blocks. What happens, you know, when someone creates a transaction or a block? You know, they're probably running a node, or at the very least, they're connected to some set of nodes on the network. And they say, hey, I've got this piece of data, and it has a hash, and the hash is this, you know, unique identifier. Do you have a data that corresponds to this? And the node that they're talking to will either say, yes, I already have it, don't give it to me, or it'll say, no, I don't have it, give me the data. And it receives that data, it then validates it based upon all of the rules of that network. If the transaction or the block looks valid, then it'll say, okay, this is good, I'm going to save this. Then it turns around and it asks all of the nodes that it is connected to, hey, I have this piece of data with this hash, do you have it, do you want it? And that process happens tens of thousands of times within a matter of a couple of seconds. And very quickly, this allows data to propagate through these networks that are comprised of thousands, if not tens of thousands of nodes. And we can actually visualize how this happens if my clicker works. This is from just observing thousands of nodes on the network, and you can see very quickly this is like one transaction and how it propagates to thousands of other nodes. This is slowed down extremely. I believe the entire time here is, what, 2 to 2.5 seconds, and that's about how long that it takes for data to propagate across the entire world with however many nodes there are. It scales very well from the sense that you can add more and more nodes, and it won't take much longer from a human time perspective for pretty much all of the nodes on the network to get it. Now, it's not guaranteed that all nodes will receive it, but it's very high likelihood. And if we're actually looking at, you know, how does the node network look from a sort of architectural standpoint, it's this really dense mesh. So at least in Bitcoin, if you're running a node, you're connected to at least 8 or 10 other nodes, and in some cases, If you're a highly connected node, you could be connected to hundreds of other nodes. So you can see very easily, if you're using this flood, fill, gossip model, then getting a piece of data to propagate through all of these nodes due to just the density of the mesh is very easy and very fast. So why are we talking about all this? There's a few different reasons. That's basically how we want data to be propagated around the network, but it's not required, at least not at the transaction level. Of course, at the block level, in order for the blockchain to continue forward, everybody needs to receive the actual confirmed block data. But having unconfirmed transaction data is important for a few different aspects of network health. And one of those is the fee market, specifically the fee market for understanding how much it currently costs to get confirmed in a block. And there's a couple of different ways that those of us who are building software that is creating transactions try to figure out what is the current going rate to get confirmed. And both of these methods require having the unconfirmed transactions stored somewhere that we can perform algorithms upon them. And basically that means we need to have these unconfirmed transactions that are in the mempool. The most common way that we're determining how much it costs to get into a block is that we're keeping track of when a given unconfirmed transaction arrives at the node, and then whenever that transaction gets confirmed into a block, we're looking at, okay, it took this many blocks to get confirmed before that transaction got in, and this was the fee rate the transaction was paying. And then we aggregate that across thousands and thousands of transactions, looking backwards, usually at the last, say, 10 to 100 blocks worth of data. And we're then creating an algorithm that says, okay, if you want like a 95% likelihood that your transaction will get confirmed in the next 1 block or 10 blocks or 100 blocks, then based upon the trailing data, it should take approximately this fee rate. That's how transaction fee estimation worked for basically the past 10 years. Now, the main problem with that is only looking at previous data, and of course we're trying to predict the future. We're trying to say, if the future blocks coming up, how much is it going to cost to get into them? If you want to have even better future prediction, then you really need to have the current state of unconfirmed transactions. And then you can start to look, what is the current state of all of the transactions in the mempool? And this is a visualization from mempool.space, where this visualization is showing approximately how many kilobytes or megabytes worth of unconfirmed transactions are currently waiting to get confirmed. And the different colors here are showing the stratification of the fee rates that those are paying. So then you can kind of easily understand that if you want to get confirmed in the next block, then you just look at the top 1 or 2 megabytes or block space worth of transactions that are currently waiting to get confirmed. You look at the fee rates they're paying, and you're saying, okay, if I pay less than the fee rate of those top couple megabytes of transactions, then obviously I'm not going to get confirmed. And this is operating under the assumption that the mining pools are operating honestly, openly, and transparently, and that they're being economically logical in the fact that they should logically take whatever the highest paying set of fee rates are. That generally works pretty well, but there are reasons why it might not work very well. And as I was going about trying to collect and analyze data for this, I actually started doing this over a year ago, and I ran into many, many different problems. One of those problems is that mempool data, it exists right now, But as blocks come in, they go out of the mempool, they get put into the actual blocks, and then of course the blockchain is permanent forever. But the mempool is not permanent. And so unless you are running some sort of service that is constantly taking snapshots of the mempool data, it gets lost forever. And so even though I run many Bitcoin nodes and I have a couple of different projects that do analytics, I have not been taking regular snapshots of the mempool. So I had to go out and I had to try to find other people who have been doing this. And there are a few people who have been doing it, but as we'll see, even a lot of the snapshots that I received ended up being kind of unusable. And another issue with all of this is that, unlike the blockchain, there is no guarantee of consensus or of consistency in data of what the different nodes around the network are seeing. So you may have a node that's not very well connected that doesn't receive all of the transactions in an unconfirmed state that a node that is highly connected will receive. And so that's kind of all to say, big caveats. The rest of my data and quantified stuff that I'm showing has basically no guarantees of how accurate it is. But I've done this on a best effort basis, and I've thrown away a lot of data that looked to be inaccurate. So I had 3 different data sets that I worked on here. The first one was 4 or 5 years worth of data, snapshots that were compiled by 3 different fairly well-known figures in this space. The second set of data was from bmon.info that was a specially configured Bitcoin node that was dumping out snapshots. And then the last set of data is some new data from mempool.space. And if you ever use mempool.space, you may have noticed a feature that they added in the past few months. It's, I think they call it the mempool goggles, but basically it allows you to drill down into the specific types of transactions that are being put into blocks. And basically they're doing something they're calling block auditing. And that auditing is showing, based upon the current state of the mempool, we expect that the next logical block for a miner to create should have all of these transactions in it. And then if a block comes in and it has a different set of transactions, you can very easily compare like what the differences are. So as I said, lots of data quality issues. Unfortunately, the bulk of that data, that like 4 years of data, once I started digging into it, it was basically unusable. Like every block that I was looking at was saying that like 90% of the transactions that were coming in had not propagated across the network, which is definitely incorrect. It may be possible to clean up that data. I'm going to have to talk to those people further to see what we can do there. And then the next set of data that I used, I was able to use maybe 30% of it. But once again, there was a problem with the consistency because this particular service, the node, was regularly crashing. And when your node crashes, it tends to lose all of that mempool data, or at the very least, when it is offline, it is not receiving the new transactions that are propagating across the network. So then what happens is the node comes back online, and when it's dumping out this data and you're doing all of these correlations to say which transactions have shown up that were not in the mempool, it has a much higher hit rate because it just didn't receive the transactions while it was offline. So I had to throw out a lot of that data as a result. And then the data from the past couple months from mempool is actually some of the best data that I've seen. Mempool.space is a pretty large infrastructure now, very great organization, and the stuff that they're doing is very helpful. But even then, I wrote some scripts that were pulling a lot of data using their API, and I encountered some oddities where I noticed that if I ran the same script 10 different times, I would get 10 different results. And as I dug into that more and more, we determined that this problem was because mempool has like 50 different nodes that they're running, and these nodes are behind a bunch of load balancers when you're calling the API, and you don't necessarily know which node you're querying at any given time. So I had to put in even more effort to basically grab data from all of their nodes and then do a bunch of deduplication and try to find the specific nodes that had the best quality data there. So what are the results? Nothing too mind-shattering, but we can point out a few interesting things. So for the 2023 data that I was able to use, this might look like a lot, 200,000 transactions over 45,000 blocks, but if you do the simple math there, we're only talking about 4 or 5 transactions per block, and a fair amount of what you might call unexpected or aberrant activity on the network related to inscriptions. And this is because when people are minting new tokens or NFTs or basically any type of asset on a network that is not just your plain native cryptocurrency transfer, it can create new game theory. It can create new incentives and reasons for people to pay extraordinarily high competitive fees to get confirmed in a timely manner. And so we've seen a number of mints, for example, where there's like a very limited number of tokens that are allowed to be created in this new meta protocol that sits on top of Bitcoin. And so people start paying hundreds, if not thousands of times more than the going market rate for a normal value transfer transaction. And so I suspect that what's happening here is perhaps some of these people who are doing these token mints have some sort of relationship or are potentially even paying some of these mining pools out of band in order to get higher confirmation transaction priority than they otherwise would. If we're looking at just the entire breakdown of the pools with how many blocks that they're coming out with that have unseen transactions, it's actually kind of the inverse. It's a little difficult to tell without looking at the other chart side by side, but the pools with the highest incident rate of unseen transactions are actually the ones with the lowest hash rate. So there's not too much that I would take away from that. But if we're looking on the left-hand side with Foundry and Binance and Via and Antpool, actually less than a quarter, less than a fifth of their blocks are showing these unexpected transactions showing up. So they don't seem to be particularly malicious. They're not doing unexpected stuff the majority of the time. And then this, finally, as we're saying, this is what I would call the most aberrant type of transaction or unexpected transaction. What is a non-standard transaction? A non-standard transaction is still valid within the total global consensus rules. However, it is considered out of band for what is normally going to be relayed by a node. So basically, if you create a non-standard transaction, usually it means it's really, really large in its data size, or it's using more operations, more computational operations than is normally allowed. And what would happen if you create a non-standard transaction and you give it to a node, like I showed at the very beginning of this presentation? The node would look at it and it would say, okay, this is valid, but I'm actually not going to tell my peer nodes about this because it's not something that I want to relay over the network. So the point being that you cannot create a non-standard transaction and broadcast it out to the network and expect it to get confirmed. The only way that you can get a non-standard transaction confirmed is if you have a special relationship out of band with a mining pool that you can give to them via some other API that the mining pool has set up. And that mining pool then agrees to mine it in their block. Usually they're going to have to use some custom calls to their own node to tell their node to put it in their block template. So as you can see here, this is an extremely tiny number of transactions. F2 pool with the most non-standard transactions confirmed, but even then, we're talking 12 transactions over 11,000 blocks. So point being, this is, I think, probably the most interesting data to be focused on, and as we can see, is extremely minuscule and negligible at this point. So my general takeaways from all of this right now is this has been a very difficult problem, but I think it's important for us to be starting to monitor this type of thing so that if we start to see these metrics get out of line and become concerningly large, become frequent enough that it may actually affect things like transaction fee estimation, then those of us like myself can start to sound the alarm, can start to question the mining pools and say, hey, what are you doing here? This is potentially not good for the health of the network. So final takeaways, it's minuscule in volume right now, but I think it's worth us keeping track of. Historically, it's a very difficult problem for us to ensure that the quality of our data is out there. I think mempool.space so far has done the best job of this, and I'm going to be working with them going forward to ensure that their infrastructure is providing the best quality data. There's definitely some improvements that we're looking at them making to their APIs. And as I said, one of the main issues that I think is concerning here is people doing non-cryptocurrency value transfers. I'm not against that. I don't think that is automatically bad for Bitcoin. I do believe that Bitcoin is a type of database. It does have a very limited programming language. It does have a lot of utility and useful functionality other than just storing and transferring the value of Bitcoin itself. But as I said, as this space becomes more complicated, as people start creating new games and thus game theory on top of the Bitcoin protocol, it's just something that is worth us being cognizant of and continuing to keep our eyes open for weird things that could change the game theory of Bitcoin mining and the network itself. So as of today, the use of non-standard transactions is very low, and as far as we can tell, the significance or problem that could be caused by mining pools doing a lot of out-of-band transactions is very low, but I think it's worth us continuing to keep track of. So I'll take any questions if we've got a minute or two.
Maybe one, but we are running behind on time.
Well, stopping sniping and front running of transactions, if we're continuing to use this same model where everybody is publishing their data, then it's kind of the name of the game that you can look at what's out there and then just say, okay, I'm going to pay a higher fee. Especially because now we have the ability to easily replace transactions, to say, my transaction got replaced by a bunch of other ones that are paying a higher fee. Now I'm going to pay a higher fee. I don't think that that's necessarily bad. I think that is kind of a pure free market capitalism principle there. So I think it's worth an entire other discussion as to what should the actual guarantees be. If you're paying a specific fee, should you get a guarantee that you're going to get into a future block? It's up for debate.
Thank you. If you have any further questions, you can try to catch up with Jameson around here and make inquiries.